Hey everyone, and welcome back. We are in the Leadership Lounge, and here we just embark on a journey for better leadership. It's not about arrival, it's not about destination, it's about evolving with the needs of the people that you serve, just so that we can show up better. Today, I'm super excited. It's another episode in our control series. Today is control of relationships, and we're going from control to connection. And we have Brielle-Majette Winslow with us.
Hey y'all, nice to be here with y'all today.
And she is the Deputy Director of Garden State Equality. They're the ones who fought for and won marriage equality. But I'm going to invite Brielle to talk a little bit more about some of the accomplishments.
Sure. Garden State Equality was just celebrated their 20-year anniversary. And like you said, we started as a marriage equality organization. We were knocking on doors, galvanizing people, making sure that people knew that it's not just our straight allies who have the right to marry. It should be any person, whether you're lesbian, gay, bisexual, queer, transgender. It doesn't matter what umbrella you fall under, but that everybody deserves love and the chance to actually experience partnership in a way that is fulfilling. We fought for marriage equality. Like you said, we won. Since then, we were one of the first to develop inclusive curriculum in schools. So making sure that our students and our LGBTQ youth see themselves in their lessons and knowing that it's not just that straight individual who can be an engineer, but I can also be an engineer because there was someone who did it before me. And if they didn't, I will build the table to do so. And I think that kind of goes into the leadership we'll be talking about in a little bit. But a couple things that we do right now, which is timely. One, we help to work with Governor Murphy to make sure New Jersey was a sanctuary state. So people who are fleeing other states where their rights are being rolled back, especially trans individuals, they can come here, especially for gender affirming care. Moving into that, we do have a tool on our website, which is our affirming healthcare map, because we know there's so many disparities for LGBTQ individuals to find affirming providers. And that's not gender affirming care meaning HRT, hormones. That means going into a OBGYN for myself and not getting misgendered and her knowing I should be here, that I want to build a family, and how does she meet me where I am to make sure that my family thrives. So that's some of the stuff that we've been doing. Our probably biggest or most recent win legislatively was the decriminalization of HIV in New Jersey. In 10 states right now who have that decriminalized. Our teams are doing, and our advocacy teams are doing amazing work to make sure that New Jerseyans experience lived equality, and that's what it's all about.
And I thank you for sharing that, right? Because there's so much at stake.
Yep.
And you guys are on the front lines of
Yep.
this huge fight. There's such huge outcomes that are dire need. Right? They feel like we should have had these outcomes far before now. A lot of times we start to try to lead by control. And
Yep.
that's why this series is so important, from control to connection, because it lets you know that no, you actually get those outcomes and sustainable outcomes through
Yep.
connection versus control. So today we're talking about control of relationships. And if you didn't catch the previous episode, these are in Tima Okun's white supremacy work on dominant culture norms. And if you didn't tune in before, it doesn't mean that if I exhibit these things, I'm a racist. What it means is that these things have been embedded into our culture, stemming down from the culture of white supremacy, so much so that we do them and we don't even know we're doing them. So, without further ado, we're going to be talking about three dominant culture norms today. That is individualism, results without integrity, and defensiveness. So, I want to invite Brielle to tell me, how would you define individualism in the context of this dominant culture?
Absolutely. So I love that you led with white supremacy, because a lot of these cultural norms that we have, and not to say that any of them are only negative, I think about individualism. I think about like the fact that we live in a capitalistic nation. We live in a country that has taught us that it is me. I have to work for my goals. I have to be in competition with the next person. We see that a lot in especially Black culture, because when you're thinking about how we were bred, Black people were told that as a slave owner, if somebody tries to leave, we have to tell on them. If there's only one person who can live in the house. It's not just us. And there's only one person that gets to do some of these things, and there's privileges here. So we were competing for a long time for the only Black person in the company, the only Black CEO in the space. And we forget that it's important to bring the collective with us, because if it's you, you paving the way for everybody else. So when I think about individualism, especially in leadership, I think more so it's the focus on my goals, my needs, and my contributions. And it directly contrasts with the fact that, like we always say, having a diverse team builds effectiveness, because just because me and you might think different, that is powerful, because what I might not see, you might see. And we get the best result that way. So individualism really stems from, that I'm not going to delegate because I only trust myself to do this task. I'm not going to let someone else speak into the spotlight because they might do it better than me. I'm not going to engage others or get their ideas because I don't want it to seem like their ideas are better than mine. And it's really that focus on, like, I do it the best. I'm not going to tap into my team. I'm going to complete the tasks on my own.
And if
Sure.
this, if ever shown up in your leadership.
Yeah. So I definitely think as a Black woman, we are taught that you don't show weakness, like, especially in a workspace. When you want to be at the top, going back to like white supremacy culture, you're also talking about misogyny. Like, everybody wants to emulate what these cultural norms of masculinity is. So no vulnerability, no weakness, no sign of asking for help. And so for me, I am someone who is both Black and neurodivergent, and it pushes me to say, I need to do this on my own. I don't need to ask for help. I don't want anybody to think I'm weak. I need to overachieve. I burn out because I need to move myself in all the spaces, because no one can know that I need to ask for help. And that's how I was when I was in my 20s, working in a space where I was a director, had about like 80 staff members underneath me. And obviously that was overwhelming. And as a leader, I didn't realize that, like, I'm only good to my staff if I'm good to myself. And that realized I used to not take breaks. I used to not say, hey, maybe if I delegate this here, I'll get a second to breathe so that I can show up amazing tomorrow. Versus, I'm going to spend 8 hours on this task without asking for help and be exhausted tomorrow. And so I used to do that. I used to really think that I thought about rest as a luxury and not a practice. And I would think that I'm the best one to do it. If I got to teach you how to do it, why would I tell you how to do it? But actually, if I teach you how to do it in this moment, does it take longer? Absolutely. But guess what? Moving forward, now you can do that. And that's one thing off my plate and a way for me to bring you to the table. So I definitely used to be one of those people who felt like if I want to get by, I got to be the one to do it. My face has to be here. I can't show someone that I can't do this. And with the times that are happening now, and community solutions are 1,000 times better when you have other people at the table, because it's a collective way to look at how to approach a situation.
Doesn't feel like I may exhibit characteristics of individuals. Are there some subtle things that you would say, hey, that's probably exhibiting individualism, right? Because it's important, because sometimes these overt things, we're like, oh, I definitely don't do that, right? But what are some subtle things maybe that would spotlight?
So I think that it ties directly into the next topic, which was defensiveness. So, like, a lot of times you feel a little overprotective or defensive when someone brings up an innovative idea or something that is different, or they challenge the way you do something because you feel like my way is right. I think some people don't realize how lack of trust in your staff. So, like, you're not giving them the activity or the task because you don't trust them. You trust them not to do it the way that you do it. But we have to realize that, like, just like we say in math, like, there's multiple ways to get to the answer to the question. So it's not just my way. Let me release the reins a little bit, or like micromanagement. Let me take away some of that micromanagement and allow for them to flourish and still get the same outcome. So I think a lot of people don't realize when they're micromanaging and not allowing constructive feedback. And I think that's the biggest one, not allowing people to voice their feedback on things to help change the way systems are made. So people don't realize that, but, like, there are subtle ways where if you're feeling a little hot and defensive when someone comes in with this idea, or they kind of challenge a system that you're using, take a step back, breathe, realize where it's coming from. Maybe they see something differently from where you do because you're the leadership, you're up here, they're down here being affected by the things that you create. And how do you take a step back and listen so that you can make those changes?
And that's really powerful that you brought that up, because I don't want the opportunity to be missed here that we said in the beginning. There's some really, right, there's lives at stake, essentially, the work that you do.
Yeah.
So how do you make capacity when in times it feels like, let me just do it because we don't have time?
Yeah.
We don't have time to worry about these other people's ideas. And I don't have time for you to be challenging me right now because we got to do this thing and we had to do it yesterday.
Absolutely.
What helps you level set to be able to say, actually, no, I know the collective is stronger than me? How do you do that in those really angst moments?
Yeah. So one of the things is like we always say if you stay ready, you ain't gotta get ready. So we try our best to be proactive with some of the stuff that we do. So I don't have to say, because I grew up with my family saying not everything's a crisis. And when you wait until the last minute, it's your fire you gotta put out. Instead of if you're already ready, you don't have to get ready. So some of the things that we've been doing, one is we may see that a piece of legislation or there's a thought or a headline around something, we'll start talking about it. What would be our response if this happens? How are we going to activate if these things happen? And bringing the collective to the table in advance so we don't feel like it's an urgency and we don't feel like it's a fire. However, that is not the way that the world works. And there are times where the house is burning. So I really have to balance when I need to use my executive decision and say, hey, this is what we need to do because I know how to get this done. I might have this connection. We've already had this conversation. We're going to make this happen. And then the times where I'm like, you know what? This isn't really my field. This doesn't touch my intersections. This doesn't touch my expertise. This doesn't touch the things that I need. So I need to step back and take a pulse check and say, hey, this is something about gender affirming care for the trans community, and I am not trans and I've never experienced this, so I'm going to let this person take this because they have better lived experience and knowledge than me, and they will probably get the job done 1,000 times better. And I'm going to trust that the professional development that I put into my staff on the off season is what gets them ready when they need to be ready. So if I'm worried about how they're going to present on an interview or on a newscast, that's not about them. That's about the fact that I have not put in place the training for them to get to that space. You know what I'm saying? So I think that like it's really important for you to have discernment and to know when this is your field and hey, because of time, because of urgency to take place, and then two, when you really need to step back and allow someone else.
What you lifted in that was a certain level of self accountability, which is opposite than defensiveness.
Yeah.
So you're saying,
Yep.
So with that segue, you did talk a little bit about what defensiveness was. Has that shown up in your leadership? And how do you address that with your teams?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I spoke about was kind of like, with the individualistic mindset, I think defensiveness goes hand in hand. I think we're always threatened that the next new person with the next idea is going to take our spot. The next person is going to come in, and because we're taught this, like we're disposable in the workplace, like they can move us. So we feel like we got to protect what's ours. And I feel like there were some times where I felt like I would be defensive, more so because see, I know that as a person who suffers from ADHD, rejection sensitivity is something that we face. So automatically you're kind of like overthinking that someone gave me some feedback. That's an attack. That means that I'm bad. That means that they're rejecting me instead of, and a lot of times like defensiveness is like this like automatic response. Like I perceived threat. So now I'm going to put up this wall. I'm going to cope with what you're doing. And I'm going to like take this like, oh, you're blaming me or you're making me feel hurt. And this is why I tell everybody like, whether you feel like you need therapy or you don't feel like you need therapy, mental health is so important. Self-care is so important. Learning yourself makes you a better leader. And I realized that like, where is this coming from? Why do I feel like someone's threatening me? Or why is someone's feedback triggering? Why does it make me feel like I need to get on the defense? And is it the actual criticism or is it their response in tone or how they delivered it? And how do you determine between the two? So I have been in spaces as a younger leader where, especially newer leaders in spaces trying to learn and trying to implement, when people don't like the things that you do, it really has to realize that like, you can't make everybody happy. Got a staff of 50. If 48 people love it and 2 people don't, that's okay. And you don't need to criticize them for that. listen to them. And then if there's something that you can implement like without neglecting the integrity of what you're doing, then okay. But even just sitting down listening is a big part of combating that defensiveness and making sure that your staff know that you are a true and trusted.
Actually, expand a little bit there because while you were speaking, and I thought about how do you help your team members kind of unpack defensiveness when it shows up for them?
Yeah. So a lot of what we do in our space, and I like to say we're really focused on culture. So we have time periods that are focused on anti-racism and decent trained whiteness. And we call out how those things show up in our work, show up in the things that we're doing, what are we not doing. But I think with helping individuals, the biggest thing that I could think of, and when I was thinking about coming on here, was that people don't realize that adverse childhood experiences and how their childhood shows up in how they come into work. Like a lot of times as a leader, we don't think about what kind of baggage am I bringing into this workspace? What kind of baggage is my staff member bringing to this workspace? And how do I treat you differently than the next staff member in what you need for you to survive and be supportive in this and thrive in this workspace versus feeling like it's a one size fits all. And I think that for my staff, I challenge them when we're reflecting on something that happens. I try to get them right after it happens. I try to talk to them and say, what was coming up for you? Like what was the mindset when you just did this? And then how did you this present? And how did this make this other person feel? And is this something that you want to continue, or how could you have approached it different? And I think sometimes having honest and vulnerable conversations allows them to be like, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize I was showing up like that. Oh my gosh, I didn't realize that the anger was coming because I'm worried about my rights being taken away and I came into here on a 10 when I should have been a 4. So a lot of times a reflection and really allowing people to see the self-awareness by being vulnerable and saying, this is how it made me feel. So I'm sure the rest of the room felt this way. How can we approach this differently? Is something that I try to model because I try to do that for myself.
You said an important thing where it's a part of your culture. It's difficult. And that's why this series, From Control to Connection, is so important because you've embedded that in your culture. So therefore, I feel safe to be able to help unpack that thing. If you call out my defensiveness and I already don't feel safe, and this isn't a practice in our culture, I can see that going a little bit differently.
Yep. And I say that to people as soon as you say something and they feel that way, as soon as you put up that defensiveness wall, it even happens in relationships, friendships, whatever. You didn't hear anything that the person said.
Right.
All you're focused on is the trigger, the threat, and that's all you hear. So it's really about sometimes the approach, the reflection, because or a lot of times, and we say this with kids in particular, they say kids ask why all the time. And I know you probably know our parents used to say, because I said so. But if you treat someone like a human and let them know why, a lot of times that defensiveness on their end like goes away because they're like, I understand where you're coming from. I was just trying to level set and realize why this is going the way that I do. And realizing that sometimes I have, as a leader, I have more proximity to information than another person does. So their defensiveness comes from the lack of information that they have and them not understanding why decisions are made. And sometimes you have to instill that knowledge on them because it builds them in their decision process, but also allows for them to build trust that you're going to be transparent.
Because earlier when you were talking about, hey, there's sometimes, right? You said when not practicing individualism, you bring collective to the table ahead of time. But there's times where you have to make an executive decision. And what I'm hearing is in you building connection in your culture is that you recognize that you have this proximity to information that other people don't, and that's going to cause some angst. So what I'm hearing is right how you go to being able to share information, even in the midst of having to make some of those executive decisions.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the last thing I would just say about that is like you ask what you can instill in your staff. I would say one of our values is purity of motive. And I would say like instill in yourself and in your staff the purity of motive. So assuming that something that is happening, or if you're not getting all the information, there's purity of motive behind why this is happening and that it will all fall into place in that space. And if it doesn't, that will be welcomed for criticism afterwards. So purity of motive is really big that because whether that's an ouch that you deliver to someone else that they're educating you on, or that's me giving information that doesn't feel so easy, but I don't have all the information to give, trusting that you will get brought to the end as the process develops. And it's really important to remember that.
So results without integrity, but I can't because that purity of motive thing is really good. And I want to make sure that those listening can understand the conditions that it takes to create purity of motive. Because
Yeah,
sometimes, right, especially as leaders, we're reading, we're watching, right? We're educating ourselves, but sometimes we
yeah,
try to implement the thing without creating the conditions for the thing. And then we
yep.
gaslight folks, right? So I don't want to be a leader who goes in and say, guys, we're going to have purity of motive. Assume that my motive is good, but I don't create the conditions for you to do that. And then that,
Mhm.
quite frankly, pisses me off every time I hear you say that phrase. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
can you talk a little bit about the conditions that it may take to
Yeah.
create that?
So I think, yeah, absolutely. So I think it goes back to like the collective first. Like if you allow people to feel like they're at the table when they give advice, or that some of the things, policies you're thinking about or changes you're thinking about have come from whether the feedback that you've opened up to others, even if they don't give you anything, even if nothing comes back, just the fact that you asked for their opinion sometimes goes a long way because it allows them to say, this wasn't something that was tone deaf. This was something that was spoken to, was listened to, and we made a decision this way. Sometimes, like, even if you have tiers in leadership, because there's always normally a hierarchy, even if we don't think about that, but like talking to middle management about what's going on, what are they hearing? How can I change this? And maybe asking them, how does this feel for you? Because a lot of times we use, like, does this feel right? And if it doesn't feel right, there might be something wrong with where we're trying to go. But like, one of the things that we do is like we never say purity of motive because we don't want to abuse the language. So if I say something, please don't have purity, please have purity of motive. Normally, nope. But it's like the way that I delivered, how careful I was in my delivery. Was there, did I say it in a meeting, then also followed up with an email and opened it up for if you have questions to ask me later on? Or is there like a, did I put time into a presentation that lets you know like this is what we've been doing this, these are the steps, this is who we spoke to, this is who we consulted with. And a lot of people feel like, oh well, why am I giving them all this information? I don't need to like justify myself, I don't need to XYZ. But you're building as a leader, your front line is your shield. But if they're not on the same page as you, when the bullets come, they're moving like this. But if you arm them to be like, no matter what, I know she has my back, so I'm gonna trust her and I'm gonna stand right here. You have to build that in every moment that you get. That's even through conversations, whether like if your staff member comes in and says, you know what, my grandma's really sick and I'm really dealing with this stuff. The next day, just texting them and saying, hey, how's your grandma? I hope that you're okay. And them saying, she pays attention. She cares about my well being. And that helps to build that purity of motive because they feel like you're authentic and genuine.
So that's not just words.
No, actions are so much more powerful. So much more powerful.
Yeah, now I'm gonna anchor it in that same point when we start talking about results of integrity. The same point from earlier is
Yeah.
you're doing a lot in a little bit of time, and especially during a climate where things feel like that even more at stake than they were before, right? We already felt the pressure of these things being at stake, and now it feels even more pressing. So some may be persuaded to do things, right, and lose some of our integrity in order to get results. Because we like you hear people say, do the ends justify the means?
Yep.
And so results without integrity, if you're going to be getting all of these rights and protections, it may seem like it's okay to lose integrity. So can you tell me a little bit about why that's a problem and how that can contribute to a culture of control versus connection, even if what you're after seems like the best?
Yeah. So I think that like sometimes when you're thinking about gaining and not having integrity, sometimes that's one like, and it really goes with all the things that we talked about. So like if you're prioritizing your personal goal over the collective goal, that's one way that like, hey, maybe this worked for me personally, but what about the person who shares three other intersections? Maybe the first generation immigrant who is not their first language is not English and they do have a non-visible disability. Is my decision for the collective also taking into consideration them? Or is it only benefiting me? So like, is this new healthcare package only benefiting my needs or not the person who also needs it the most? Also, like we just talked about information and purity of motive, like a lot of leaders will mislead or withhold information because they feel like if I only tell them, if I omit some of this, they'll be on my side and I'll get the okay from everybody. But they're not really okaying the whole thing. They're just okaying this part that I needed to get to where I wanted to go. And then, but sometimes you have to realize that like you might have to put something to the side for a very valuable teachable moment with a staff member, which will like move things forward so much more in the future versus this one thing that's going to get me by. And sometimes you have to really outweigh the weight of these things because that right there just gave you trust. It just gave you accountability. It just gave you this like short term like success, like in long term success because you missed this what you had needed to do, but your staff member is going to do this and show up for you. So I think it's really big for us to remember that like sometimes in our yes, do I want to progress in the world? Do I want to progress in my career? Is this my last stop? No. But sometimes my chase for visibility, my chase to have success is at the expense of this moment that my staff member needed to also gain the same things. And I think that we have to really use our discernment to think about that. So I believe it's really interesting your questions because I was in a different forum a couple weeks ago where they asked, "Can you be a leader without integrity?" And I thought that was a really good question because I don't think that you can be a leader without integrity in a positive way. Can you lead without integrity? Absolutely. You could be a manager without integrity, but I don't think you can be a leader without integrity and make positive change. And so I definitely think that, like, right now, when the house is burning, you're feeding into the white supremacy of, I'm going to make you burn out, and every second you won't have a time to think about others. But that is the biggest weapon against what we're up against is to use the collective to move forward. Even if we arrive a little late, we got to make sure that everybody is protected and not just one space and making sure that we don't perpetuate that because that has been why we're here now.
That's such a huge point because it looks can be deceiving. So
Yep.
we're like, right, the very thing that we need to do sometimes looks counterproductive to what is needed. I love that you've used that often
Yeah.
throughout each of them is right. You're constantly weighing because it's true. As leaders, we're constantly weighing. But what we're talking about here in our pursuit to build connection, because when I'm hearing you say, right, that's the stuff that lasts.
Yep.
You could say you could kick this can down the road, but you're going to still have all these other problems, right?
Yep.
But and getting to connection when you're weighing in a way that is in pursuit of the collective,
Yeah.
not necessarily the individual. Like I recently posted about I'm doing as this control to connection series is happening. I'm just putting out posts of leadership is practicing more blank and resisting the instinct because it is instinct.
Yeah,
We've been
absolutely.
in this culture so long, our natural
Yep.
instinct
Yeah.
is to lead with control. So, right, it's to move away from that instinct. And the one I did recently was practicing more empathy and resisting the instinct to center ourselves. And you
Absolutely.
talked about that,
Yep.
right? Because
Yep.
when stuff happens, we're not saying you're a bad person, leader, if you center yourself. We're saying
Oh
that's
yeah.
instinct, right?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that I tell people, and I think it might be beneficial, is like, I've done a lot of trainings, and I know you do them too, and facilitating in spaces. And I always use this analogy. One of my favorite animals is a wolf. And if you know about wolves, wolves normally lead from the back. They're the ones who are in the back of the pack. They're the ones who are making sure that people are protected from each side. They can see forward. But the people who you first see are the individuals, and not because they're in danger, but because the trust is on me as the leader in the back to tell you there's danger up here. We're going to shift gears. Trust me. We're going to move here because I can see that from where I'm at. And I think for me, I like to think about that because, yes, there are times where my visibility, my representation is imperative to what's happening and I must center myself. But there's also a lot of times where, like, my voice is not needed at the table and my voice is not needed in this moment. And what makes you a great leader is to know when you have to say, and this is a time for me to give someone else a platform to shine.
And I said that because going back to the way that you describe it, like weighing out this, since naturally we center ourselves, we don't typically think about the things that are impacting other people unless it's impacted us or we've seen some direct evidence of it. And I say that leaves a lot of people out of our leadership.
Yep.
when we lead that way. So in most cases, it's no malice. It's just what we instinctually do. And that's why this
Yep.
series is about unlearning, right?
Yeah.
So that we can be better leaders. And there's no arrival, but
Yep.
just to be better leaders. So I would like for you to close us out with what it is that you really want us to be able to take as we move from control to connection in relation to relationships.
Absolutely. I think that the biggest thing is to one, realize leadership is a journey. You're never perfect. You're always learning. And if you're not open to having an open mind and learning people as individuals and their needs, you're stunting both your growth as a leader and their growth as a person. We yearn for relationships, whether that's romantic, whether that's platonic, whether that's in the workplace. And some of our natural instincts are in like direct contradiction with what it is you need to build these lasting relationships. And I think that if I could tell anybody anything, and this is the journey that I've been on, is self-awareness, like vulnerable, and knowing that like sometimes you got to step away and realize that like I need to unpack these things that I've been carrying for 35 years that are affecting me in this workspace. And how do I do that so I can show up better for my team? And I think that like a lot of leaders don't realize that like leadership is a journey, and it's a journey where you are also building and repairing your personal self to be the best leader for the people that you see professionally.
And the way we show up is in direct contradiction of what it is that we need. And I recently did I do Fan the Flames on Fridays, and I said we have to check our ego because ego is typically first voice, right?
Yep.
That's the thing that shows up first. And the
Yep.
reason why it does that is because ego is a protector.
Yep.
So because it's a protector, it lives in the past and it lives in the future.
Yep.
It's trying to defend and it's trying to prove, but
Yep.
it's not necessarily trying to connect because its role is to protect you as an individual.
Yep.
So it's not probably going to bring you to the connection. So once you identify your needs, you have to check that ego because the ego probably isn't going to be the one that helps voice you to get your needs.
Absolutely. It's, so, and that goes hand in hand with anxiety. Anxiety also does that. Like I said, if you can instill on anyone to be vulnerable as a leader, sometimes that goes a long way. And knowing how to also protect yourself so it's not used against you, but using it to motivate and galvanize your staff, it goes a long way.
Thank you so much for being here. But before we leave, I would like for you to let everybody know where they can find you, right?
Absolutely.
Or some of the work that you're doing. Share.
Sure. So you can always find me at gardenstateequality.org or come to one of our events, see what we're doing. We're in all 21 counties in New Jersey. And then also hit me up on Instagram. It's Winslow, WINSLOW _Majette, MAJETTE. I love to see what everybody else is doing in the workplace and see how we can further collaborate for the future.
Thank you. And as we leave out, remember, leadership is not a destination. There is no arrival. There's no getting it. It's a practice. It's a discipline. So we have to keep working at this thing. And it's just about getting better and better each day. The more that we're aware and the more, like Brielle was saying, that we know ourselves, then we can start to unpack these things and it has less of a negative impact on our leadership. So then we can lead our people better. If this resonates with you, share it with somebody. Please like the video, save it, but most of all, sit with it. Until next time, see you in the Leadership Lounge. Bye.